Next thing up, we've got expert mode. Expert mode kind of changes the way that connections are being made inside TP. Right now you can see that all these options are available and visible, these current outputs and inputs. If you enable expert mode and come back in here, you can see that these have all kind of collapsed and none of the inputs or outputs are visible. But what happens is, if you click on the outputs, you now get an immediate drop-down menu where you can pick one of the components maybe, and then whatever you mouse over gives you the ability to try to make that connection. So that's expert mode. It's just kind of the fast way of making connections. If we disable that again, of course, we'll come back and we'll see all the regular inputs and outputs. And this is kind of an interesting part of TP. If you right-click on the operator, there's a whole specific menu here. This is different than the right-click menu out in space. Out in space, you get access to the creation menu. But on an operator, you get quite a few different things. You get a disable, which will basically turn that off. You can see that when we turn off that position, this particle group was using that position, and it's no longer available. So those particles are no longer being born because they don't know where to be born. We can enable that again. We can say connect from output. We can say what we want to connect from. And then as soon as we click on another operator, or we right click, it gives us a menu of what we want to connect to. We'll go ahead and cancel that connection attempt. If we right click, we can say disconnect outputs. We can disable that vector output, but we want to go ahead and keep that. If we right click, we can say disconnect all. There's also input visibility, where we can expose those parameters again, just like we do when we click and drag here. See output visibility, show that vector again. And then of course there's the favorite invisible all and visible all. And then of course invisible unused, where it'll hide all the unused ones. Another fast way to hide all the unused, if you're showing all of them and you double click on the operator and then double click again, it will just show the one that's being used. Some other right click menu options we have, if we select a couple operators here and we right click out in space, we can say copy or cut to take them out. We'll go ahead and undo that. We can also then paste those since we had them in memory, or we can remove the two of them. These options down here we're going to cover a little bit later. Basically, when we start dealing with the debug mode, where we're going to view data, what we'll do is we will right click either inputs or outputs that are being used. That's very important. They have to be used. But if you right click them and say write to debug log, what will happen is you can see now that it appears red, and we'll also right click here and say write to debug log. As we scrub, you can see all of this information is being piped out here. This is telling us what born particle is going to a particle connection, their particle IDs. But if you want to turn off all of these debug options, because if you have several of them in multiple locations, it can start to be quite a bit of data piping through. What you can do is you can right click and you can say clear write to debug, and basically this will wipe out all of those exposed debug values, and so now we'll have no debug info. And just as a quick intro to debug, you can see now that what's happening is it's counting up the time value. Time is 0, where the delta time is 160. These are in ticks, of course. There's 4,800 ticks per second. And let's go ahead and close the debug window and turn it off. And what we want to do right now is take a quick look at the hierarchy, how the hierarchy works in TP. What we've got is 3 particle groups right now, red, green, blue, and we've got some rules here to create them. We're going to rename this to birth, and I'll select the master dynamic and click on create. This will create a new child dynamic set under the master dynamic, and we're going to call this move to. And what we're going to do is we're going to say I want to affect all particles, and I want those particles to have a new velocity, and we're going to do that by selecting the velocity operator and drag him out here. We'll make that connection, and we will say I want you now to move in the X direction. So what's happening here is these particles are being born, and they're being given first, they're being told I want you to move at a certain speed, and I want you to move in a certain direction with a certain direction variation. But then what's happening is there's another rule after that that overwrites that previous information and says, okay, I want all particles, all red, green, and blue, to move at this speed in this direction. And so this second rule, this second dynamic set, is going to overwrite the speed and direction of the first one. So this is very important about how TP processes rules. It goes from the first rule, next rule, etc. And every rule gets applied at each step. So the last rule applied is really the one that takes effect. But let's also take a look. We're going to say, oh, we don't want to move him above. We want to make green a child of red. So drop him there. We're going to select this all operator and say I want you actually to affect the red group. You can see it changes to red. So now only the red particles or his children are going to be affected by this velocity. So you can see the blue particles now fan out the way they used to, but the red and the green particles both follow this new rule. So this is key as far as how TP processes particle groups, their hierarchy, as well as how it processes the rule tree. Something else we can do is we can right-click on the dynamic sets to disable them. And you can see they kind of appear grayed out there. That'll also work in the master dynamic. You can right-click to disable. And you'll notice a distinct difference if you right-click on the name versus on the icon. What you get is a new menu in TP3 that gives us new cache controls, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So this concludes the intro to the UI. Let's go ahead and get into some of the other topics.